different kind of lens. So over to you, Colleen.
Thank you, Lisa. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here. There we go, there's that green button on the bottom.
I don't have the rights, I can give them to you. So. And also, so while Colleen's doing that, just so you know, we're going to, once Colleen's taken you through the ladder of change, we're going to put you into smaller groups so you can have a conversation around, you know, what you think of it, how it's useful or not, etc. So that's how we're going to move from here.
All right. Can everyone see this pulled up here on the screen? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, so so like Lisa said, this has been sent as a pre-read. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to look it over, but just to frame what it is that we're trying to measure here, we've been working on these national commodity platforms for a number of years, and we've had some really good successes with them. But what we hear from people a lot is that some of the greatest successes have been the things that are least measurable. They're improved relationships between some of the partners or stakeholders. And so this is an attempt to measure those more qualitative aspects of the work that we do with the platforms. So let me just quickly show you sort of how it's put together. You'll see we have different success criteria, 9 success criteria. Actors representation, actors attitudes to dialogue, actors meaning like stakeholders here, actors understanding of an attitude towards root causes and sensitive issues, actors alignment of interest, buy-in from decision makers, collective action, financing, platform institutionalization, and gender. And then across the top, you'll see we have 6 different levels of incremental change, starting from 0 and going up till 5. So I'll take 1 and just walk us through 1 row so we can see what that progression looks like. I'm going to take attitudes to dialogue. So start out 0, there's no dialogue, right? Level 1 is embryonic dialogue, is emerging between some stakeholders, maybe not everyone's at the table. Level 2, we have most stakeholders, but the dialogue is mostly driven by narrow interests. Then we move up towards dialogue is characterized by active listening, mindful speaking, openness to others' opinions. Level 4, dialogue is characterized by increased trust, compassion for the specific perspectives and needs of others. And then level 5, which is our goal, is the stakeholders are supporting each other, outside, I can't talk, of formal dialogue events. So that is sort of how it's framed. And this tool was designed by the Global Green Commodities Program team. We've tweaked the wording, we've gone back and forth on it ourselves to where we feel like this is a good tool. And now I'm really excited to share it with you and get feedback and see how we could maybe improve it. And so this is really an opportunity for us to see if this works as it is and what we can do to make it better. So how will this be used? Oh, one thing I want to say before is this is in English and Spanish. You'll see in the file that I sent, the second page is in Spanish. My goal is one day, hopefully soon, for this to be translated into French and then maybe Bahasa. I mean, shoot, it could be in whatever language we wanted as long as we had someone that could help us translate it. So if you think this would be really great for your work in XYZ language, then we can definitely work together to translate it. But so how will this be used? This is an interesting tool from my perspective because it combines the qualitative and the quantitative with some like planning and strategic implications. So our idea is that this will be completed annually by the platform team, whether that's the platform coordinator. Hopefully it would be multiple people as part of an exercise. Maybe it's part of an annual monitoring and evaluation workshop held with the whole platform steering committee. However it makes sense in your country with your platform, that's fine. Ideally, it would be a group of people working on it. And let's say the baseline for one of these success criteria is a 0, and for another one it's a 2. You know, you're not going to start out at the same place for each of these rows. We could say, okay, we're at a level 2 right now. What do we need to do to get to a level 3? And that's how it can really help with the planning process. It can help to sit together and articulate a strategy to move up this ladder of change, up to the next rung. And it also helps us from a global perspective at the Green Commodities Program to really see where people are. You know, we can make an assessment. Our global advisors can say, well, I think that they are at a level 3. But it's really helpful to hear where other people think they are, the people who are really doing the work day to day in the country. And it's a way to quantify some of these things that are really hard to see. And that makes it also relevant potentially for results frameworks in the future. You know, you have indicators and targets right here where the indicator might be the alignment of interest of the different platform stakeholders. And then we say, okay, well, the baseline's a 1 and our target by the end of the project is to be at level 4, for example. And then we can work towards that. And so we can start to sort of validate and verify some of these more qualitative pieces that are so rich, you know, and that's what the platforms are really doing way before we get to the point of the national action plans where we start, you know, did we achieve XYZ target? You know, so this brings it a little bit earlier. So what we want to do with you now is we're going to go into breakout groups and then we'll come back for a big group discussion. And we want to know a couple of things, or we'd like you to discuss a couple of things. What improvements could be made? These could be wording changes. You think, I'm not sure I agree with the difference between level 2 and level 3. They could be bigger things. You know, is there a whole row that we're missing, for example? Is there a key success criteria that's not represented here? Is this a useful tool? You know, I've explained what we think it's useful for, but do you see any relevance to your own work? And then are there ways that this could be utilized beyond what I've just outlined? You know, we could not have even thought of some cool use for it. So that's where we are. Lisa, would you tell people how the breakout groups are going to work, and I will pull up the questions that I have.
Yeah, sure. All right. So as Colleen said, so this is somewhere in your email inbox too, in English and in Spanish. So you might want to pull that up for when you go into your breakout groups. So what's going to happen is you're going to get a little notification on your screen, and it's going to ask you to join a breakout meeting. And then you'll go just click accept, and then you'll find yourself in a kind of another virtual room with someone else or a couple of other people from the call. And then these are the questions that Colleen just kind of prompted. So feel free to discuss what you like. These are just prompts for you to start with. So what improvements should be made? Is this a useful tool? And how else might it be used? And then you'll get like a 1-minute warning before we're going to come back together. So we're going to give you 10 minutes. And yeah, that will just flash up on your screen. And then if you don't, you can accept to come back earlier if you're ready. And if you're not, you'll just be brought back in when the time is up. All right, so let me set you up. This is going to take a little bit of time, so bear with me.
Does anyone have any burning questions before we go into the breakout groups? Okay, great.
Okay. So I'm just checking. All right, so here we go.
Hi, just checking. Are we meant to be in groups yet? Because we're not in a group yet.
Yeah, it's funny. You haven't come up in the list. So I see you there, which is why I sent a little message going, is everybody in a group? Let me see if I can move you into one because that's really strange. Why don't we just be in a group? Because you're two people, aren't you?
Yeah, we're two people.
All right. Okay, so let's us just be in our group while they're doing their thing.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
We bring that up.
Yeah.
I must apologize. I also didn't read this beforehand, but I think that this is really interesting from my point of view. So as Aline mentioned, on P4F we kind of support a range of initiatives, and the work and I specifically work on are actually on demand side measure initiatives in particular. So I see some ways of applying this. I think one of the differences is that we'd normally be working in like trying to in a platform that's trying to create more demand for sustainably produced commodities such as like palm oil or cocoa, rather than working within a national producer setting. We're working in the kind of consumer space, at least on the initiative that Betty and I work on. But one of the key challenges that we have had is exactly this, like how can we measure our success? And I think that what you've got here is quite helpful actually in terms of like incremental steps in terms of things like actors kind of representation and buy-in into the platform. So we're usually convening groups of private sector actors, government actors, industry alliances, and civil society. So that's kind of the main spread of different actors that we'd be convening. I think one thing that isn't in here, I don't know whether it would fit, but one thing we're often trying to kind of understand better and assess is the role of the facilitator. So as we're generally funding a facilitator to convene and kind of, I guess, support a process of dialogue. So I think we have tried to do some kind of analysis around are there particular qualities of the facilitator that can enable change within that multi-stakeholder dialogue. That's one thing that I don't think is in here. I mean, I'm not sure whether it would fit or not, but just a kind of comment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, you know, working on this, we have a whole separate stream on facilitation because we, exactly as you say, consider it so essential. So, you know, same with all the platforms, they all have to hire an independent facilitator. We have a terms of reference that we draft for that. And we also run training for them on how to do that, partly because, I mean, I think in the UK, you have a lot of good facilitators, you know, that's their kind of profession. Yeah. But in the production countries where we work, it's really hard to find people who are just facilitators. You know, they might be academics and facilitators, but it's not really a profession yet. Yeah. So yeah, I fully agree with you. And yeah, I'm not sure if it fits in here, but it's certainly a criteria of, like, for me, it's one of those kind of pillars. If you don't have that at the beginning, the dialogue will kind of struggle, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess I'm trying to look in here. I guess the other thing So buy-in from decision makers, that's quite, I think, a kind of relevant one for us. Looking at supporting on a different level, but we support the Amsterdam Declaration's commitment on various commodities and trying to eliminate deforestation from them, shared by I think 7 European countries. And one of the, in a way, the decision maker there that they're ultimately trying to influence is actually the European Commission. So we see kind of like incremental shifts in EU policy as kind of progress that we're trying to work towards, and it can be very difficult to track and monitor that. And I think one of the like hardest things, and I don't know whether this would help, but one of the hardest things that we find is when we're supporting these initiatives for like 1 or more years and having to be able to kind of justify supporting it further, being able to demonstrate the progress that's been made in that year, I think is often really difficult because, like you say, it's very qualitative. So I would try, and it's hard for me to fully evaluate this because I'm just looking at it now, but I think it'd be quite interesting for us to try and just apply this and see which of the characteristics, I suppose, fit, because that could be a really strong kind of way of us being able to kind of objectively evaluate, because we always end up having to kind of develop very kind of qualitative case studies and drawing out kind of examples of policy change, but we don't have a framework that's as robust as this, I think, to do that. I think that this could be really interesting for us to look at further.
Yeah. I mean, I think just being able to show, you know, whether it's a donor or all the people who are giving their time voluntarily, right, to dialogue, because normally it's voluntary time, is to be able to say, okay, so when we started at the beginning of the year, this is where we were, you know, here are the shaded boxes, and the assessment, you know, based on your feedbacks, you could do like, you know, we're going to have a conversation about it, or you could ask people, is we've moved up the ladder in this way, right? And that's like, oh, that's progress, right? Without having to do these, like, as you say, these depthful kind of case studies. I wonder, what do you think about like sharing this with everybody in the dialogue at the beginning? I'm kind of curious about that. Like saying, this is what we're up to, guys. Are you, you know, so giving them all a kind of a place to go to together, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. And I think that one of the challenges that we have as P4F being a kind of funder of different initiatives is that we are one step away from the kind of implementers of the initiative, so who are facilitating it. So I think, I suppose, like the key thing is to first of all get their buy-in, so that they understand how we want to kind of evaluate the initiative. And then often it can be, I guess, a bit sensitive as well. That's if it's quite like high level platform and kind of I guess pressures on people's times, like getting them to buy into kind of going through something like this. I don't know. We haven't tried something like that. How would you normally approach it, or have you kind of tried and tested this at all yet, or are you very much?
No. I mean, this is the beginning of the validation of it, right? So, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things we say in the platforms is essential at the beginning to show people a high level overview of the process that they're buying into. Like, we're asking you to commit to this process, right? And for me, normally that looks like a slide with kind of outputs on it, which is great. Yeah. But this would give all the things that is like, actually, there's a way that you need to show up in the room, and we're expecting you to evolve in terms of how you participate and listen and talk and understand each other and over time. And I just think the more you can set the stage up front, then the smoother things can be, or at least you can refer back and go, okay, so we're in this stage, you know, where we're tussling with each other, because that's normal. Right? So I don't know. My sense is I would really like to see someone try it at the beginning of a process.
Yeah, I mean,
I think with Ecuadorian fisheries, because they're at the beginning. But yeah,
I think this would apply more to some of our other initiatives that I'm not specifically working on. So, like a cocoa forest initiative, or like the Africa palm oil initiative that we're supporting. But I think slightly different angle. I think if we were going to try and use something like this in terms of working with our demand side partners, it is slightly, I guess the goal is a bit different, because it's more around kind of like, well, you're trying to get them all to agree on an overall direction, but then, which I suppose is the same as with the national platform, but then within that overall direction, there's quite a lot of space for individual companies to choose the pathway that they want to take. So I think that this would need to be adapted if I were to try and apply it to the initiatives that we're specifically supporting from a religious point of view. But I do really like the kind of way that you've tried to map like qualitative kind of criteria, such as actors representation, on a kind of step way incremental change. I think that's quite helpful. So it's something we could look at trying to adapt.
Yeah, exactly. There may be lines which are like, oh yeah, that works perfectly, and there may be lines like that's just totally not relevant, or there's a whole line missing, like you said with the facilitator. For your kind of own monitoring overview purposes, you might want to know, like, trust with the facilitator. Does the facilitator know the topic? Do they trust them? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think where this might help is, one of the kind of challenges we always get asked is like, well, when is enough? Like, at what point have we kind of done enough in terms of working with these actors to try and get agree, like, and then make incremental progress towards whatever their goal is. It can be quite difficult sometimes to kind of know when you've done enough. Like, when you've got like 80% of, I don't know, all palm oil certified, is that enough, or is it worth driving for the last 100%? Like, and I think these kind of things, I don't know how that would kind of fit in. I'm just wondering how to kind of fit in, I suppose, the kind of quantitative goal that they might have. I guess you could just fit it in like that, exactly on this scale, stepwise. Sorry, I'm kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the whole point. It's a really good, like, starts, like, spurs your thinking kind of thing. We're at time, so I'm going to have to bring everybody back. Cool. I sent them a minute's warning, but you didn't get it because you're with me, basically. 10 minutes goes quick. So, but we're going to have a quick kind of popcorn style round. It'd be great. Sorry, I don't remember your name because I just see Federico.
Oh, Lucy,
yeah. Be great if you could share, some of the points, in the plenary, especially around facilitation, because I just think that's just so essential. Cool. All right, I'm going to bring everyone back. Sorry. There you go. They get like a countdown from a minute to come back. So, have you used this platform before, Zoom, for things like this?
Wait.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, I think it's pretty.
It's good.
Yeah.
So everyone's coming back now?
Yeah.
Hello again.
Hello there.
Well, we had a great discussion in our group.
Good. So did we. I ended up being in a group because for some reason Federico and Lucy didn't go in a group. So we had our own group.
Well, I hope Federico and Lucy got to talk about it themselves then.
Yeah, it was good.
Am I still sharing my screen? I don't know. No. Okay.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. So for those of you for whom a ladder of change on systemic change is new, and breakout rooms are also new, imagine how much you learned in the last 15 minutes. And yeah, we're just going to do a quick kind of plenary, right? Colleen, shall I just hand over to you?
Sure.
Yeah.
So our idea for this plenary, we have about 10 minutes to discuss, and no formal order, just sort of popcorn style. So if you have a comment, something that came out of your group discussion, or something that you didn't have time to say, please just jump in.
Yeah.
Sorry, go, David. I'll go after you.
Okay. So I think the first kind of point that we looked at was how the broader formulation of a platform's objectives and the overall goals fit into this framework. Because it seems to be, as you mentioned, it's very much focused on the process and the governance of platforms, which is indeed quite important. But it does seem that for a platform to be effective, there would need to be some type of clear vision and goals and working towards a set of metrics or targets, perhaps. So we were wondering if that's perhaps part of another evaluation tool or another way to look at these platforms. But it does seem that even as part of the governance or management process, that this development of goals is quite important. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to understand some of the different areas in a vacuum. For example, collective action, to what end? And then another maybe quick remark to throw in there is that under institutionalization and the role of governments in basically leading those national platforms, I was wondering if if that's a goal in its own right, or if you should more think about the formalization of these platforms, which would have a big role of government actors, but not necessarily only government actors. And formalization would more look at how the actual structure of the platform is being formalized and clarified for all the different actors involved. So yeah, I'll stop here.
Okay, well, great. Okay, let me see if I can go through them sort of one at a time, or maybe hand off to Lisa for one of them. But so to your point of linking the tool with metrics and targets, I agree completely. I think that that's a really good point, that we should be looking at what the objectives are of the platform. One of the things is that the platform is a space where you design and co-create those objectives. So rather than us coming in as, for example, UNDP Green Commodities Program and saying, this is what the platform's trying to achieve, and that links directly to collective action of what is the goal of this platform, aside from getting towards a national action plan, what's going to be the content of that national action plan. That's really something that comes out of the platform process.
Can I just jump in, Colleen, to add on that? I think the key thing there is that generally it's, for in our work, it will be different in all of your work. It's like agricultural production, sustainability linked to the SDGs. So SDGs is your big framework. What are the issues? How do you address them so that the whole commodity is sustainable in your country? Now, that's the broad framing. And then you look at, okay, well, specifically, what are the gaps and where do we need to focus our attention to say that something's sustainable over time? But yeah, so in terms of having like a clear vision and then goals, and then of course targets and outputs, I think just to say that I think David fully agree, and we really focused a lot on that in the last 4 years, and so there's like loads of stuff on that, and we were really struggling more with the qualitative piece. So we're going to I think after this I'm going to show you a bit more of a kind of hard-edged Excel tool as well. So yeah, back to you, Colleen.
All right, great. Thank you, Lisa. And then to your point on institutionalization versus formalization, that's a really interesting point. And we actually recently had a colleague from Costa Rica sort of make the case for not having the government be the one that takes over leadership of the platform, as UNDP is phasing out of that lead facilitation role, because a change in government might sort of put at risk the leadership of the platform if the incoming government isn't as invested. So I think there's some room to explore what is the ideal long-term scenario of who is running the platform. So maybe that's a wording change here from institutionalization to formalization, and we can take a look at that. But your point is well taken as well. Okay, so I think we don't have a ton of time, and so what we'll do is maybe just let people say their feedback and maybe not answer each comment so in depth. So Gabriela, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So just quickly, we thought it was very useful. Some of the comments that we had, one was about, following up with David's comment about how to link the tool with methods and pathways to move across each level. So kind of support tools for moving across levels. And also whether the intent of the tool is all to calculate an overall score for kind of stakeholder dialogue. If you look across, is it across all the different criteria? Is there going to be kind of an overall score for everything? And then the other thing was about interpretations. So somebody who works a lot with kind of standards and certifications, some of these, I think it would be really useful to have interpretations for some of the descriptions of the level of each criteria. So, embryonic dialogue, what does that mean in terms of the framework of this tool? Or collective action, just to ensure that there's standardized interpretation across the different groups that are using this tool. And finally, kind of the continuity between each level, across each level. So sometimes just reading at it, I think it's challenging to see the difference between, the incremental changes between level 0 and level 1. And one of the ones that just popped up first was for success criteria 1, actors representation. It goes from level 0, actors do not show interest in participating, to few actors drive the process. And I think that, that gap seemed to be significant in terms of the changes of actors. So maybe a little bit at kind of the continuity of each level.
Okay, great. Those are all really great comments.
Had Mike next.
Yeah, I was speaking with Aline and Josh in our group, and just to quickly summarize some of the points that we talked about that haven't already been discussed here so far. We thought that it'd be interesting to know or to see whether or not there are any processes or tools behind basically the ladder of change that helps to assign a level to each one of the different criteria. Like, for example, on some of the criterias, about actors' attitudes or understanding or actors' alignment of interest. Those are topics that we thought were, it's quite difficult for a small committee of people or even just one person, even harder for just one person to kind of gauge the attitudes or the understanding of the different actors within the platform, or in this context within a platform or any group really. And so to kind of, we were wondering if there was any thought about developing survey tools that are very clearly worded, that can be used with the platform participants in order to get a level grade out of, to basically better gauge and better measure actors' attitudes or behavior or understanding of content or alignment of interest, etc. The other point we wanted to bring up was basically if there was any thought yet about how this information that would be graded or come out of this process of measuring the ladder of change, how it would exactly be interpreted or feed back into the kind of adaptive management process to make improvements to try to get the levels up towards where we want them. Many times, like actors changing attitudes can be a really difficult and lengthy process. And if you don't really invest your strategy on changing attitudes correctly, you can be kind of throwing away a lot of effort, time, and resources. And so, one comment we had was also, it might be interesting to think about for at least maybe some of these, maybe not all, but for some, what's the strategy that you're going to take if you do, depending on if you get a low level grade on one of the criteria, how are you going to what's the next step in the analysis to identify why an actor's attitude is not positive, or is not, why their understanding is not where we want their understanding and attitude towards the root causes to be. And, then from that further analysis, a little bit deeper level analysis, you can better structure a targeted intervention to try to get people's attitudes up to where that you want them to be. So those are a couple of the suggestions that we had, in our discussion. And
Great.
Aline, if I forgot anything, Aline, go ahead and jump in if you've had any thoughts. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're more or less at the end of our time for the this discussion here. Does anyone else have any comment they want to make before we move on to the next piece?
Lucy?
No?
Hi, yes. So we were just kind of having a discussion around how this might be applied to some of the demand side measure interventions that we're supporting. So that's more working rather than within a producer country, working within a consumer country to try and move people towards consensus on demand for sustainably produced commodities and reflect that in their buying practices and policies. And I think one of the key things that we're interested in from that angle is the role of a facilitator. We work a lot through facilitators, and I'm not sure whether that would be just covered in a completely separate framework, or if there'd be some way that we could build that into this as an indicator as well. So that was, and I think in general it's a really interesting framework, and there would be scope for us to try and adapt it and apply it to the context in which we're working. So it's something that I might look into doing after this. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for your thoughtful consideration of the tool and for the comments you provided. They're really interesting, and we'll take them and consider them. So Lisa, let me hand over to you.
All right. So I think one of the things I just want to say off the back of that is that we kind of presented this as a kind of bubble, and of course the bubble sits inside of a big swimming pool of bubbles, which is like how a platform works, and that it goes alongside all sorts of guidance around multi-stakeholders, how to facilitate, how to get feedback from people when they participate in dialogue through feedback forms, etc. So I think we kind of popped it out of context maybe for some of you, and just acknowledging that. And so what I wanted to move into now is a piece around, it's a tool that people can adapt, and it's for monitoring not the platforms or the dialogue, but for the output. So for monitoring a national action plan in our language, it could be a national strategy, or whatever you're calling it, this collective action that's written down. So I'm just gonna, well, before I share my screen, I was going to tell you a few things about it. So we've designed this in a way that it goes alongside some guidance that we have around the fact that we think that a stakeholder or a plan like this that has multiple stakeholders that have actions in it is monitored through a monitoring committee process that also has multiple stakeholders in it. So you have a group that is like overseeing the monitoring of the implementation of a plan, and that group is multi-stakeholder in reflection of the multi-stakeholder actors. And then to say that you could do that at a national level or a sub-national level, so it would work like for a regional plan, landscape plan, national plan. The idea is that this is going to be filled out, this tool is going to be filled out like at the beginning of the implementation of the actions, and then updated at least annually. For some people, you may want to do it more often, like every 6 months. And that the information that comes from it is used by the monitoring committee to then report out to stakeholders, so all the people who've been part of creating it, so those stakeholders, but also online in a transparent way that allows like the world to see, right? So from our perspective, in terms of the national commodity platforms, you know, for Costa Rica working on pineapples, for example, they want the markets to know that this country has a national coordinated strategy for sustainability in pineapple. So they want like large supermarkets like Walmart and Tesco to know, but they also want the Dutch importers to know, for example. So like, how do you make that information available online in a transparent way? We also think that the tool can be used, you know, when in the process of completing a plan or a strategy, is that it can be used to be like, oh, have we managed to get all the right information in there? Like, do we have targets and baselines and the right indicators and everything that we're going to need to be able to monitor our progress against this? And of course, this can be tailored in any way that anyone wanted, and it's not rocket science. I mean, for those of you who are M&E experts, you'll be like, yeah, I've seen this before, you know, but a lot of the people that we work with are not M&E experts. So let me share with you. Here we go. All right, so you can all see this. Yeah. Okay, so we've developed this also off support and working, especially with our platforms in Paraguay. They started off this work for us last year, and so we've just been finishing it. And basically, this is very simple. It's kind of like, what are your objectives and outcomes? Who's doing the implementation? So who's the lead institutional person? Which partners might also be involved, and what's the time frame? And depending on how you structure your plan, you might have objective and then outcome and then outputs, and then against each output actions. Some people may flip that around. That's kind of up to you. We're not saying that you should follow our logic. We like our logic because it has logic, but other people use these terms differently, and we're not kind of stuck on them. And then as you move along, we've got things like, you know, they said that we have then the indicator. So like, what's the method of assessing progress towards the output or the action? And then how are you going to verify that? So what's the data source that will verify that that indicator is, you know, that gives you the data to meet the indicator? And then also the baseline. So what's the starting point of that indicator for those particular actions or outcomes? And then here you can kind of look at, okay, so what's the goal? So if your plan is for 5 years, where are you trying to go over 5 years? And then you may have targets on an annual basis to see how you're going to make progress along that. So that's we would define those per action as well. So there's the targets, that's progress, and then here you just have issues and challenges and plans to address them. We also want to include in here financial monitoring, because the National Action Plan isn't just the actions, it's also how are we paying for these and who's paying for them, right? And so there's a section here on financial monitoring. And so there's kind of like, okay, what's the estimated cost? This would come up within the actual plan. So it would be in the action plan. How much do we think it's going to cost to implement this action? And then how much of that money is secured as a percentage. This will automatically calculate for you. Where are those sources coming from? So where are the different sources of funding? So you may have some from government, some from private sector, some from civil society, some from donor partners, etc. How much has been spent in total? What funds are remaining? And then any comments or notes. So we've really designed this as a way to like trigger thinking around, this is what you should be thinking about monitoring when you're finalizing a plan, and when you're setting up your monitoring committee, and when you're thinking about what you're going to report, right? And then I just want to add one other piece here. So this is an annotated template. So Colleen's made this amazing thing, and it has all the comments here, so you can see what we mean. So guidance about, you know, what would go in these boxes. And then there's also guidance. The things I'm telling you now are written here on the guidance tab. So just explaining what we mean by each section. And one of the things that we also provide in guidance here, which I think you can see now, is around policy and regulatory frameworks. So one of the things we do a lot of work with, of course, with the government is like looking at how either you get new legislation or reform of policies and legislation, or enforcement of them happening, depending where the problem is. And one of the things we're like thinking, well, what does progress look like? Because it takes a really long time to change a policy. I mean, so in an action plan, you can have, very often we'll have, shifts in legislation are made so that they incentivize sustainable production rather than incentivize chopping down the forest, for example. So we thought like there's a kind of like a process for that. And so we just outlined like what progress might look like. So you might have an assessment process around where are we at? Like, does the legislation exist? Is it national? Is it subnational? Are there regulations in place to implement the legislation? Are they actually implemented? And if they're implemented, how are they being enforced? Are they actually being enforced? And is the enforcement monitored? And then if you're wanting to change one, you'd be like going through those questions. Okay, has it been drafted? Has it been proposed for approval? Has it been endorsed? Has it then been adopted? And then is it under implementation? So just kind of additional guidance around what monitoring over, like progress over time for policy shifts or legislation shifts, the kind of questions you might need to ask yourself in terms of what you're looking at for targets over time. And then also in this tool, we just put in a kind of an example from the Dominican Republic Cocoa Action Plan. So you can just see, what that might look like as an example. I'm sharing this with you on this call now. We're going to send this out. It's just in the process of being translated into Spanish for everyone. And then we're going to send this out to all of you, plus all the rest of the community who have to design and monitor national action plans. So you'll get this after the call. But we really wanted to announce it and say it's ready finally for everyone. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions that people have about what I've just shared. That was nice and dry compared to the previous one. Gabriela.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think it is very useful to have the matrix spread out and kind of as a monitoring tool. And I think it is also just from the Green Commodities platform methodology, it would be interesting to see kind of how this initial measuring tool to create a diagnostic of stakeholders could be incorporated somehow with the root cause analysis to outline the goals of the national plan, kind of thinking about how those two come together. Yeah, so I think it's actually pretty neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, this is Mike. My video's off here. I put it back on. Yeah, I guess in just initial observation, it looks it looks like a good way to organize, kind of a simple way of organizing, a platform's kind of trajectory and what the objectives are. I'm wondering though, sometimes I've seen if there's not enough clarification about kind of terms and definitions of an indicator, that there can be some confusion about what should be tracked. And really, it kind of is designed at one point in time, and then someone else picks up the duty of actually doing the data collection, and they don't know where to start. So one potential suggestion would be to include kind of like an annex to this Excel sheet, that once the indicators are kind of defined by the platform, to go through the exercise of actually kind of defining in more detail what each indicator, what the key terms mean in the indicator and what the methods of data collection are. You have the means of verification column there, but I've just working in M&E, I've sort of received things that are very basic, have very basic definitions of the indicators for me, and they cause lots of confusion between people. So I think if possible to invest a little bit of extra effort in that design phase of the indicators, it really does help.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I probably flipped through it too quickly, but Colleen's put a really super helpful link in here, which is to the UNDP guidance on indicators. So that is the annex that I think you're looking for, and it's just like a URL that you can access online. So it's in one of the cells under the guidance on indicators. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so it's there.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? Was that really get really excited about that? I'm not an M&E expert, so this is I love it, and I'm also like this would be really useful when someone could summarize it for me. So yeah. Okay, so we have one more thing that we wanted to talk to you about and ask you about, and so I'm just going to hand back to Colleen for that.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And I thought that your presentation was mesmerizing. So
oh, great. Thanks very much.
And a really nice introduction to what we're going to talk about next as well, which is sort of the process of the online piece of the monitoring. So less of the technical, what's the indicator, and more, how do we actually go about the public monitoring? And Lisa mentioned when she was just speaking why we do some of the reasons why we do the online monitoring, the public sharing of information, and so some of those reasons also are just to be responsive to markets, to show that this is a low risk area to source from, to show that progress is being made for, like she mentioned, consumer countries, different agencies, or all those things. And so it's important to publish the results online in a publicly accessible format in the local language and in English. And that can be really sort of daunting, I imagine, for some people more than others, maybe, and depending on who you have on your team. If you have an expert web designer, then great, or you can hire someone to get that process up and running really quickly, no problem. But for others, I think we have a lot of platforms in different countries who are now at the point of, great, we have an app, we're ready to start implementing, and there's sort of this like, okay, we have to go to the next step. So one of the things that we've been exploring is the idea of designing or developing a template for each of the different commodity platforms in the different countries to use. And there are some advantages to having a common template. We'd have more consistency in terms of the design and visuals of different platforms, and the content of what's included, as opposed to right now we have some really good websites that have been designed in the platforms that are already, or the national action plans that are already being implemented. But it would be nice to have a little bit of consistency around that. But then I think more importantly around that consistency is that people would, and again, building off of the Excel tool we just saw, people would be sort of prompted to think about, okay, well, these are some of the ways that it might be important to share information, some of the things that are important to include on a website, and developing a template that we offer to the different countries would hopefully reduce the burden for the platform team to not have to develop their own website. So I want to run through a couple of scenarios and then take a minute to discuss that with everyone, what that might look like. So the advantage, so one option would be that we just design a template and we send it out and we say, use it if you like, if you don't like, it's up to you, take it and run. The other option would be to have a central green commodities program site, probably linked to the UNDP website because that's where our site is. And then, we could just, we have an external link to each site. So we say use it if you want or don't, great. And having each site linked to our own then increases the global reach, which is good for all the market reasons we just talked about. The third piece, and what, to be candid, I'm really interested in, what I think would be really exciting, but that other people may have different ideas about, is that there be a central website, that there would be a different page rather than a link to an external site. There'd be a page within our site for each of the national action plans. So you could come in, you could enter in your own data on whatever timetable was agreed for your national action plan, and say, okay, well, here I'm just going to say, Mike, you're in charge of entering the data into the online system. So you pull up your page, you log in, and then you enter, well, this is where we are at this year. Maybe you can upload your whatever document, the regulation that's been passed as evidence, but then, that could come up on the website. And you would be absolutely in charge of entering your own data. We would not control that whatsoever, but the role that we could play through that sort of a central site would be to take on the administration costs for the website, and again, like reducing that burden for the platform teams. But there's other advantages to that as well. In addition to increasing the audience, it would facilitate South-South learning, I think, if the different platform teams and National Action Plan monitoring teams could see the progress that was being made in other countries. It'd be a way to really link what's happening. You could refer back really easily. We'd have contact information. And then it provides a resource for the companies trying to source sustainably, where they can come and look and say, oh, well, this is all the work that's being done in all of the platforms. They come to one place, they can go through it. And it provides an evidence base for governments who are looking to demonstrate commodity sustainability, that, we are really all working together in this scenario. Now, some of the disadvantages to this idea is that will a template even work? The national action plans are different enough in each country that they would need to be substantially tailored for each scenario. We are not, like Lisa just said, we don't really care if in your country you use the exact format that we have of output to activity. It makes sense, there's a logic to it, but if the national action plan is set up differently, fine. But then the template would need to be tailored, which is fine. That's a manageable thing, but it's potentially a disadvantage. More importantly, there's a concern about whether or not the government in each country would be open to what might be perceived as a third-party site. So if it's a government-run platform, maybe they want it to be on a government-run and managed site rather than linked through UNDP. So those are the sort of scenarios that we've been working through. And I want to be really clear that this is something we're exploring right now. We don't have budget for it lined up, but we could look for budget if people were interested in this idea and thought that it would be useful. So it's definitely on the table and up for consideration and debate. But so a couple of discussion questions for us now as we come back together. Oh,
I'm just gonna jump in on time because rather than having a discussion, I think just it would be great. You can see we're kind of chewing over this idea, and I'm just thinking it might be just great to get people's initial reactions. Do you think that's worth exploring? Do you think, oh, that sounds like a nightmare? Generally, what do you think about this as we chew it? And then we'll have time to do a round at the end. Is that all right with you, Colleen?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, those are the questions.
Okay, cool.
What do you think? Would this be useful? Is it worth pursuing? How would the government respond? Just, initial reflections.
Awesome. So what do people think?
Hi, it's Aline. I suppose it's kind of an interesting idea. It's definitely not something that we've thought of under our program, and I suppose some of the things that it makes me think of for sort of querying further is what the audience, what the intended audience would be for these websites, and balancing that as well with what you could probably appropriately put on it as well. So just based on what we were discussing at the beginning, you know, this tracking of multi-stakeholder dialogues and processes comes with a lot of political issues and nuances with a small p, and things that you probably wouldn't be thinking of publishing online or on a website area, and you know, means of communication of those would probably be more targeted, and that you know, ways of communicating it nuanced as well, depending on who the audience is. So so then I'm thinking, I don't know, what is it that you could put on such a website, and maybe it would be more of a sort of scorecard of progress against, you know, the objectives that you outlined in your matrix, something that's sort of outwardly more objective maybe, but again, you know, who would be going to check in on what that progress is, and would that be enough to tell the full story of what you want to tell as well? Because ultimately these processes on the whole take time, and our job is as much trying to communicate the positives and the forward look, and sometimes just a scorecard doesn't really give you that, or demonstrate the momentum that is often, like you say, the interesting things come out from, you said right at the beginning when you were describing it, often the positive results are in, you know, oh, this partnership has improved, etc. So yeah, just balancing what you think you would be able to put out there and what story that would tell in terms of progress, and to who.
Yeah. Thank you.
If I can quickly jump in there, this is David from iFeel. I think there are some good examples that we're already seeing around jurisdictional programs that have this type of monitoring websites, and I think probably the most advanced one is the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil, which has their PCI strategy, and they have an online dashboard which tracks progress against that strategy towards 2030. I think, you know, one thing that we're coming across in our working and looking at these different what we call jurisdictional strategies is that transparency is very important, and particularly then transparency on the outcomes and the impacts that you're creating. And that's important not just for the overall credibility of what you're trying to do, because I think transparency also creates pressure that you're publishing data that is robust and verified. But transparency is also necessary then, as you said, to communicate to those audiences. And I think it's a good question about who would be the audiences. So if the idea is that sourcing companies and investors would want to invest and source from the specific country or region because they know there's sustainable commodity production happening there, they need to base those decisions on some very clear information. And so these information portals would probably be one of the main vehicles to do that. So I think, yes, it's a good idea to do it, and I think I would say as much possible information that can be made public, would be ideal to go on there. I think I think it's the overall goal of these platforms should be playing a public role and providing a public good in a way. So I think that's, at least from our perspective, it's actually quite important that you push transparency as far as possible, and there will be boundaries in terms of what will be put on there, of course. But I think we would argue for as much transparency as possible. So again, I don't know if you have the links of the existing platforms that are out there. There's also some work from the Governor's Task Force on Climate and Forests, they also have different dashboards on jurisdictions that are in their membership. So there's a few examples out there of that already happening. I don't think all of them are great examples, but there's something to look at for sure.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Ronald, we haven't heard very much from you. Do you want to hop in? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Can say that it's always quite interesting to listen to what's going on, but finding a tool that can track various interventions, I find will certainly be useful. Additionally, the kinds of data that are being collected and how they're being interpreted, what they're showing, doesn't always come to the same head, meaning that they don't always match. So our experience now is also sort of sensitivity around releasing various bits of information. So then trust us to what is happening more particularly with concessionaires and even small scalers. I know that takes it down to a very operational level, but this is where we're at now. And so something that pulls things together, obviously, well, I think it can be good, but it's just to sort of get the buy-in. But we see how that sort of pans out. But it would be good sort of to hear, and I guess to read about, how other people have fared and what sort of the lessons learned could be.
Okay.
Maybe transferred into this very interesting environment.
Okay.
So, yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ronald. And let's see. Luis, I think I didn't get a chance to say hello to you yet, but do you have anything to add to the conversation? Any thoughts? If you like.
No, yeah. I think it is a very, very useful tool. And I share all of the points with the other guys. I think we will need to understand better what would be the actors that would be using this tool, verify how we could the level of transparency. What would be the level of transparency of the information that we want to share with all of the other initiatives, and maybe somehow basis on to compare the initiatives between the regions, between the all of the jurisdictions would be very interesting tool to share these lessons and to share the achievements and to understand how we could better address the challenges that we have in each region in regarding specific problems. But I think, yeah, it's a very good, a very interesting tool, and I think it has a lot of potential to generate benefits in monitoring and evaluation.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. All right. And we are running low on time. We have about 5 minutes left. We didn't get to hear from everyone, but in the interest of ending on time, I think let's move to closing. Lisa, do you want to bring it home for us?
Yeah, sure. So I just want to say, well, Irabi, did you want to say something? We haven't said hello to you yet either.
No, I think it's fine. I mean, I just wanted to reiterate the same point that Colleen made earlier about the fact that if a government partner, government wants to take the lead in the platform, then I guess there's always the challenge of whether they would want a third party or another party to host this kind of information. So I think it's something to look at, but I think it also depends on the national context and whether the kind of relationship that they have with that kind of third party in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Which also could change with elections. So that's something else.
Of course.
Yeah. All right. Great, thank you. All right, we're going to just do a quick round of closing. And if you could just share, like, what's one thing you're taking away from this hour and a half that you spent with all of us? And then you can pass it to someone else like we did on the intros. So I can start. I think one thing that I'm taking away is just this, like, there's so many people working on things that we all need the same tools, and especially this piece around the importance of change that it's hard to measure. Yes. So and I will pass it to Luis.
So my thoughts on the my main takeaways from this 1.5 hour meeting. First, it's really interesting to see that we have a lot of people engaged in this initiative. Very good to know that we are building, that there are some frameworks that are seems very effective, very interesting, are being built. And yes, I just want to get more involved and get to know better of what's happening, and looking forward to stay in touch.
Great. Will you pass it to someone else on the call?
Yeah, I pass it to my colleague, Aline.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, well, multiple things, and I'm sure other people will share some of the same ones. First of all, thanks very much for convening these calls. It's the second one that I've been on, and I think this whole format of convening people with the videos on, and even being able to do breakout groups and do this discussion is something that we don't get a lot of in the broader community of practice. So it's very welcome. And I also learned specifically this idea of being able to do breakout groups and video conferencing, which I didn't even know was possible. So that's great. And then more generally, yeah, like I think my colleagues will agree. We do a lot of work that is around that ultimately at its heart has multi-stakeholder dialogue and partnerships and processes at its heart. And we've been developing maybe lighter touch but similar sorts of things, trying to track this sort of ladder of change. So seeing what you guys have developed and being able to take some inspiration from that and assess the pros and cons of what we've both developed is very useful. Thank you. I will pass on to Ayurebi. Sorry, Ayurebi. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly.
Thank you. Now you got it. That was great. So I think for me, I think this has been lovely. I think it's a fine tool that we've got. I think, but also with most tools, we would learn a lot more about the tool once we start getting it used by different people and seeing the sort of feedback that they get from the use of the tool. But I think it's a great thing to have, and I'm sure as it's being applied, we can learn more from that. I want to pass it to Ronald, I guess.
Cheers, thanks. As usual, it's very refreshing. You tend to learn a lot. And, looking at the way that the meant to structure these tools around the various processes, it's probably going to be pretty useful in trying to track it. And I guess as we use it, as our brother said there, we'll see how to improve it and so on. So cheers. I can pass it on to Gabriela.
Thank you, Ronald. I think my main takeaway is something that Colleen and Lise mentioned at the beginning about creating tools to measure processes that might not necessarily produce clear quantitative results. And I think that is something that is very challenging but very important to really understand the success of a project. So I think that thinking about including that in the way that we monitor and evaluate projects is critical.
Great, thanks, Gabby. Will you pass it?
And I will pass it to David.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like I've already talked a bit too long here, so I just wanted to thank the team. It was really useful and interactive meeting, and it's just great to see you know, a good group of people working on this. So thanks.
You want to pass it, David?
I don't know who is left.
Jordan, Mike, Lucy, and Federico.
Yeah, Jordan.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Oh, as this has been delightful. It's really great to see kind of the whole sort of suite of tools that go into all of this stuff. You know, get out of my sort of narrow box of the kind of M&E that I do. It's always good. So I guess I'll pass it to Mike. Did I miss somebody?
No, Mike's good. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, it was really great to be on this is my first call in this in the Green Commodities platform, kind of a community of practice here. So I'm quite pleased to be engaging with some new people here and to be hearing about the good work that's going on across the globe. I guess, yeah, takeaways for me is just meeting everybody, and also probably, yeah, to think about how to track some of these less tangible qualitative aspects of the platforms. And I'm starting to learn quite a bit more about platforms, and so I'm really you know, interested in how this tool can be applied potentially with the new small pelagic fish platform that we just launched on Monday this week. I'm going to bring this to the National Platform Coordinator, who I sit in the same office with, and we're going to talk about how to adapt some of the ideas from this tool into the monitoring processes that he'll be setting up in the coming months. So yeah, it was really great.
Great. Say hi to
I'll pass
Pablo.
it to, oh, sorry, who's left? Federico?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lucy dropped off, but I reiterate, yeah, what Aline and Luis had said. And I'd say on the framework you shared at the beginning, I was really impressed by sort of like something that stood out for me was the need to show the practitioner community an high-level overview of the process they're buying into, and I think there's a key takeaway for our program too. And I want to again thank you all for this opportunity to participate in this forum. Thank you.
And Colleen, you get to take us home.
Perfect. Well, I learned a lot from all of you, and really it's nice, it's particularly nice for me to get to interact in a really constructive way with a wider group of people than I normally work with on my day-to-day. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time to have really thoughtful critiques and commentary. It's quite useful. But I will keep it short because I know we're already a couple minutes over time, and just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us. This was great, and we will be sending out a link to the recording of the call and these tools. Like Lisa said, the National Action Plan Excel spreadsheet is being finalized in Spanish right now, so we'll send you the English and the Spanish versions. And you already have the multi-stakeholder ladder of change. So I think that's it. Lisa, anything I missed?
Yeah, just to say on the multi-stakeholder ladder of change for systemic change, it was a draft that we're validating with you. So you can trash that for now. I mean, you can look at it, but we'll send out a kind of a final version that's kind of formal, because it's got no logoing on it or anything about where it comes from. So we need to just kind of do that before we send that out as a final version, and just take into account some of your feedback as well. So thank you all very much. Wishing you nice evenings or days, whichever part of the world you're in. And a special thanks to those who got up super, super early to join us. So Looking forward to seeing you all in Peru. Don't forget to come to budget and plan to come to the conference where we all gather together in the Amazon and get to do all of this kind of learning, but face to face. So more soon on that as well.